What's going on, everybody? James here from Artificial Entertainment, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to be able to set up climbing and go over the climb point generator, which is a new option inside of the asset with the dynamic parkour tray system. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so we are back in the folder or file that we have been using in the previous tutorial videos, and in this one, like I said, we're going to be covering climbing. Now, climbing is handled in a few different ways. In the last video, when we were looking at the motion warping settings, we did set up the ability to attach to a ledge. So we've got the character attaching to a ledge and doing the ledge shimmy left and right. However, we don't have anything else set up, like we don't have point climbing available, and a few other things as well. So we're going to add a few more things to this as well as, like I said, going over the climb point generator. So the first place I am actually going to start is going to be the generator itself. So if we go to the dynamic or DPTS underscore assets folder, and then the BPs folder, you're going to see this option here, which is the generator. Now, these boxes here are actually climb points, technically speaking. They're set up for wall running. So wall running is actually defined through a climb point generated, and then you can scale it, all that good stuff. Again, I'll show you all of that here in a moment. But I just want to note that wall running is not free wall run. And that's just primarily because in order to ensure the system had full accuracy in how it performed actions, it really needed, I guess, essentially something to tell it that this is where we wall run. I do plan on adding something that's more of a free wall run base in the future, but for right now, it's just going to be based off of where you place these points and define some information. So let's go ahead and add a new climb point generator into our world here. Now, the second we add it in, if we go to the details section, you're going to see that we have some settings here under the default. We're going to start with the primary settings here, so we'll expand this and then the point spawn settings. Now, what we can do, the first thing is, so we're going to set points per row. We'll just go 4 points. Space between points, we'll set it to 150. Number of rows we'll set to 1, so we'll just do a nice line of boxes. Space between rows, we can just leave blank. And then for box extent, we're just going to go 50 by 50 by 50. As you can see now, we have 4 50 by 50 by 50 boxes that are being spawned into the world thanks to this generator. Now, the way that this works is once you have your boxes set up, so I'm actually going to scale these a little bit differently. So I'm going to make them a little shorter. Let's see, we'll go ahead and space them out just a little bit more, something like this. Now, there's also additional settings that you can use as well. Here, we'll cover the rows really quickly as well. So the way that this works is that each one of these points represents an individual climbing location, and the overall spawned points represent a climbing type. Now, the reason why this is set up this way is because, let's say, for example, you want to set up something like an Assassin's Creed style thing where it kind of jumps from one point to the next point to the next point. If you want to set it up on an easy grid fashion, you can just say number of rows from 1 to 2, and then we just need to set the distance. So we'll go with 100 units. There we go. Now we got 2 rows, same box size, same everything, but now we have 2 rows instead of 1. So this allows us to be able to generate as many points as we need. You can just keep going with rows and just add as many as you need, change the spacing, whatever you need to do. But once you have your points defined, I'm just going to take the rows and set it down to 2 here. From there, we just need to define a climb style. Now, there's also additional settings that we're going to cover here in a moment, but I want to kind of cover the main stuff here. So the climb style is going to reference what the action type's behavior is going to be. So, for example, if we set it to ledge, we're letting it know that we are allowing it to move along the surface here. So we can move left and right. It's not like so small that it can't really move. Now, there are additional traces to ensure that the ledge is actually valid, but this is just sort of an additional stopper, so this way we can ensure that if we want it, just make it so he goes from point A to point B, kind of attaches himself to here, and then he can either jump to here, or to here, or to here, wherever. Then we would just want to make sure to set it to point. Now, if you're using free climb, I will say that the best practice is to just go 1 row, 1 point, and, make it a good size. And, you can put objects like vine meshes and stuff in here, so that way you can have a climb up vine wall, or you can put whatever you want as far as mesh stuff goes, because there's actually an entire spawning thing that we can mess with as well. But so once you set your climbing type, so I'm just going to set this back. I'm just going to do Control Z here. But once we have our spawns defined, like the box size, rows, all that good stuff, Now let's go ahead and spawn an item on point. So we're going to skip over this one real quick. We'll come back to that in a moment. But we're going to look at the spawn item on point settings. So if we set this to true, and you have an option between a static mesh or a skeletal mesh. So I had to set it to some sort of value, but depending on which one you pick is going to change which one spawns. So if we go ahead and just set static mesh, and let's say we'll grab a cube, shaped cube, you can see that now it spawns cubes in, but they're a little bit, off-centered, off-size, scale-wise, and everything. So if we open up the spawned item transform here, we can adjust all of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the size. Let's see, we'll bring it down a little bit so this way it's more kind of centered. Reduce the size even more. Because this way what we can do is we can kind of size this to what our climb point needs to be. Now, one of the easiest ways to do this is realistically to start off with a 50 by 50 climb point and then just kind of mark what the adjustments are. Then you can use that to kind of set the scale value, but I'm doing things the hard way just so I can show you guys that even if you do it the hard way, it's not that hard. Then we'll bring it in, and then we'll bring it back, and you can see now we have nice little boxes that we can use for climb points. And again, you can spawn any static mesh you want. We can also, if we go to skeletal mesh here, objects to spawn, I can spawn in, let's say, a mannequin. But because we've scaled it weird, it's now spawning in weirdly scaled mannequins. But yeah. So I'm going to set this back to static mesh. And so now we have these points here. Now, the way that the points are traced is that it first looks for a point and then kind of traces a little offset from its position. So like there's times where it might get like if the point is very small, it might actually get like to the edge of the point accidentally because of the scale of the point size. And what this is essentially referring to, if I open up the settings here, go to the Y value, it's this. It's kind of its overall length. So there's an option here that we can actually make it so for specifically like these smaller targets, right? If we want to make it so the actor is always going to go to the center of the object, what we can do is there's an option here that says add targets to points. If we select true on this, you'll see that points are now added. However, they're added in this direction, but that's totally fine. So we also have double-sided points. So if you want to use target points on both sides, I'll explain that here in a moment. I just want to show that it doesn't, it's not just one side restrictive, but this is now technically the forward direction if you're using climb points. Just to kind of explain briefly what these are representations of target points that you want to go to. So like the middle point of the object. The reason why this is useful is because rather than accidentally getting off to the side, let's say if you're, if I take, for example, this wall here, I'm going to take it, move it. So if we have something like this, right, and we want to be able to kind of climb up this, but we don't want to, if we're climbing up the wall and we start more kind of to the left or to the right of this, it's going to go direct up. Just because, again, the trace is just looking for an object and then tracing dimensions. But these points help ensure that you can correct the location during climbing. And again, we'll demonstrate all this when we get to the showcase of everything. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is going to be the snap point to surface settings. So this is in case you have like, let's say, complex walls, like some castle walls with some, rough edges, or, maybe they have some insets like this. But you want to make sure that your climbing points are assessing that inset correctly. But obviously, that would mean you would then have to line them up individually one by one. Well, not exactly. If we go ahead and just select this option, select it to true, which is the use traced snap point service. And then the trace distance, we'll set it to like 150. So you can see now there's a trace coming back from each point. Now, if I just move this back, you can see these points collide with it, but these don't. So therefore, it's not getting inset. But if I keep moving this back until it hits, there you go. Now, these two, because they're not hitting anything, are on the outside, but these two have inset themselves based off of the surface that they're finding. Now, this is just a location adjustment right now. This is not a rotation adjustment, though I do plan on, again, updating that in the future. Okay, so now there is actually one other thing that I wanted to go over, which I realized is the collision settings. This allows you to be able to define how the climb points in the world are going to be defined with collision. So this is the overall collision response, excluding whatever you're setting for the trace channel for climbing. This can be the visibility channel if you just want to trace everything, though I wouldn't recommend that. Um, but for the box collision settings, you can set this to ignore, block, or overlap. Same thing with the spawned item. And then inside here, you can choose if you want to, let's say, ignore the climb trace box, but trace on the item. You can do and set this backwards. This way it's ignoring, the visibility channel completely instead of blocking the visibility channel. And this way it's kind of just completely ignoring it, not even worried about it. It's just kind of, like the item is there, but the system will not be able to locate it and vice versa. So you can define the collision completely within the settings. Height, the target points here. I almost forgot. We have a target point offset as well. So like, let's say if you don't really like the location of the point, I do not recommend putting it up to like the ledge here. So like if we bring it up, I do not recommend putting that there. You want to keep it low to the top edge because the system is going to trace up and look for the ledge on its own. So either in the middle or slightly below the middle would be the best spot. But realistically, I recommend keeping it at the middle. However, if that middle gets adjusted by any reason because of the object you're spawning in's origin point or whatever the case may be, you can still go ahead and use the appropriate location. So once we have climb points in here, though, we're going to change this climb style to point for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this wall out and this wall out. And then I'm just going to make this. Let's go ahead and adjust this. The one thing is this is run off the construction script. So if you change the object that it's placed up against, you just have to move it really quickly so that way it runs the trace. Otherwise, it would be running the trace all the time, and that would not be very good once you have a lot of climb points in place. Okay, so now that we have some climb points in here, let's go ahead and start using some stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to move this over and we're going to rotate the player position here. Now, if I go ahead and click play and I just go up to a climb point here, you can see that it attaches to the climb point. But because I do not have climb directions being selected, it will not actually allow me to do anything. But you can see that the traces are going out. I have them enabled right now, so that way you guys can see how it's determining climb points and finding them. So now the other thing I want to point out is because we have point target enabled, if I go ahead and do this, if I do this, you can see how it kind of pushes itself to the middle of the point rather than just going straight. And if I go more on this side, you can see he moved more to the left. And if I go more to the left, he will move himself more to the right to get that adjustment. So, this is a way that you can make it so that way it's always going to be on the point correctly. Now, let's go ahead and set up the point-to-point target situation. So if I go ahead and go to the tutorial assets folder here, open up the animations, traversal. So I've got this ledge jump up animation. Now I'm just going to use this one for all directions because realistically the setup is the exact same for all the other directions. It's just basically defining them based off of the animation type, and that's just setting up the motion warping windows basically 8 times for all 8 directions. But I will say that I have used four up, down, left, right animations and then just put for up left and up right, up left and up right, just using the left and right versions or up versions if you want. Same thing with the down. So you can use 4 animations for all 8 directions if you wanted to. But again, just to save time, I'm just going to do an example of one. So I'm going to go ahead, open this up and get the root motion enabled. Now with the root motion enabled, go ahead and make a montage. So I'm going to right click on this, create anim montage. Now, the way that the point climb system works is that it's using the height point as the location to jump to. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new notify track just like we have done in the past, and we're going to add notify state and motion warping. Now from here, what we can do is just kind of look for where he detaches from the wall, because we don't want to really put it on everything. We want to put it when he detaches from the wall. So this one we're going to drag a little far forward, because we're just going this motion from here to, let's say here, is going to be moving to the climb point location, right? So what we can do is with that in there, we're going to go up to the root motion modifier, drop down menu here, and we're going to go warp target name warp 1, or also known as the height point, making sure ignore z-axis is checked and warp rotation is true. Now, just like with the climb up to ledge action, the warp rotation is going to be the normal of the object found. So if the ledge has a slight rotation, or if you rotate the climb points here, it will actually attach itself based off of that rotation as well. So, and I will show you guys that here in a moment. Let's just go ahead and open up the third person blueprints, BP third person character. I'm going to go ahead and just locate my jump up to ledge. So you can just, if you have the montage up, if you click on the little file icon with the magnifying glass here, it'll browse to it in the content browser, which then if we then open up the character blueprint means that with that highlighted, we can just go to, I guess we actually have to put the function in. Okay. So, my bad. If we go to the My Blueprint section, Interfaces, and then go to the Action Events section here, you're going to see the Climb Jump action. So we're going to go ahead and double click to bring that into our graph. Just like before, we're going to kind of highlight the play montage in the mesh, Control D to duplicate, pull off of the montage to play, and get a select node, just like that. And then plug the climb direction into the select node, and you'll see that all 8 directions that appear with montage slots. Now, just like I said, I'm going to be putting these all in as up, and it's again just for speed purposes. But all I've done is add the motion warping window here, and then added it in to the list here. So we actually need to do one other thing here, which where at the end, we're going to right click, add notify, and this because we're setting a climbing state, we're setting ourselves back onto a ledge or to a point target or whatever. So we want to make sure that we call it the notify set climbing. And then we're going to go ahead and also, just because as I had stated before, the blend out can sometimes be a little bit problematic. So we're going to take the blend out and set it to 0.1 rather than 0.25. So now with all of those changes, just making the motion warp window, setting the climbing notify, and then changing the blend time. Let's go ahead and click on play here. Then we'll go ahead and go up to a point. We need to enable the directions though. So let's go ahead and open dynamic parkour trace system here, climb settings, and climb type, point to point type, allowed point climb directions. And we will enable all of them unless you're wanting to use the required action key for climb transition, which we are going to be covering just later in this video. But make sure to disable this if you're wanting free climbing. So there's an extra step here we would need to do. But let's go ahead and if I disable that and go ahead and click play and then do this, you can see that might not be exactly proper. Now there's a little bit of a jittering. And if you recall in the last video, I talked about, it's making sure that the warp location is set when it needs to be. So we're going to look at, it's possible that we're either setting it too early or too late. So we're going to pull it back 1 frame and see if that helps with it. And this is, again, just kind of motion warp tweaking, and that seems to have solved a lot of it. Now, we are going left when it wants to go up, so it's a little bit wonky. Let's go ahead and we're just going to bring it back just a little bit more. And again, it's just about fine-tuning it until we find the right spot for motion warp, and you go, yep, we can do that smoothly. Look at that. So now we can go in all directions. And the cool part is, too, is that it doesn't require just climb points. If I go ahead and move this up here, and I go up to a climb point here, I can go up, and then I can even go up. So which means I can attach to the ledge here, and I can drop back down. So you can attach to climb points and use these as sort of transition points, and then this way you can get up to ledges that you can just, that you have preset on your map. So there's nothing that says that you have a bunch of map work to do except just adding in climb points where you want to have climbing. And again, this same step process can be used for all 8 directions. I'm just showing you how to do it using the 1 because it's just faster. So that's really it, as far as and that's why when we have the ledge transition or the idle when we're in point, these are in the animation blueprint just to specify. When we're on a point, you can see that it's using the on ledge idle, but if we had a blend space, it would be using the left and right. So, but that's really kind of the main elements of climbing, and depending on how you set this up. So for example, let's say we'll take the climb point here. We'll go ahead and add a new one in. So we're going to go to the assets folder here, blueprints, and we're going to open a new instance of the climb point generator. And we'll go ahead and we're just going to set it to 1 point, 1 row, and we'll go 50, 50, 50, just so that way I can see the box. And then what we're going to do is make the Y a little longer And we're going to make the Z a little bigger too. All right. So if we go ahead and, for example, let's say move this back here, we'll make this so we can transition from this set of climb points to, let's say, this climb point here. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is that they don't have to be perfectly aligned, but you do want to keep it within reason because the system can only determine objects so far back. But using the trace settings menu, you can adjust a lot of things. So now what we're going to do is go and set the climb style to free climb. And we're going to keep the target points off. And I think that's all we're really going to need to do for that. So we're going to go ahead and click on play now. So now if I go ahead and I get on a point here, go up to here, can see that it found a new point. Now, we don't have an animation controlling our free climb right now, but you can see that it's looking for the edge of the point. And if it finds it, it looks for another place to go to and is able to assess the locations. I think I might have this offset, which is why I tried to jump to the interior of the wall there. But this is just kind of playing around with the locations. I would honestly recommend setting this up a little bit more effectively, maybe moving these points over a little bit, certain things that just make the system work a bit more effectively. Now, when it comes to things like wall running, it's not just as simple as just going and setting, for example, if we took this one and set it to wall running, that's not going to be good enough because we also have a wall running action disabler within the settings. So it is in the ground action settings under miscellaneous, which is where a lot of the wall run settings are. And we're going to cover some more wall running stuff in a separate video. But just so you guys know, if you go into miscellaneous actions, allowed miscellaneous actions, and you do not have wall run selected, wall running will not be an option. So just to clarify this, because I don't want people to think that just because you put the climb point in, that's enough. No, it is not. You need to ensure that wall running is enabled as well, because there is wall run jump options and other things that are based off of if wall running is true. Now let's talk a little bit about the different ways to set up the input. So as you saw here, if I go ahead and just run up, get on a point, and if I just hold A, he'll keep going. Then W, then D. He'll just keep going and looking for points endlessly. There's no additional input required. But if you wanted to, for example, make it so that way you have to press the action key. So if you have it set to, let's just say, for example, E, making it so that way whatever that's pressed, or I'm sorry, actually we have it set off with the jump input now. So whenever we go off of the jump input, all we are going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and grab from the dynamic parkour trace system, and we're going to pull off and set climb jump input. And it's just a simple Boolean value that we can plug in just like so. And we're going to plug it off of the start and stop of whatever action you're using, because right now it is set up off of jump. We're just going to go ahead and do this and set the action value in just like this. Now you want to make sure to put it off of completed as well, so this way the action value turns it back to false if you're not pressing the key. Now, if we go to the system here and just make sure, so require action key for climb transition, we're going to set that to true. Compile and save. And now if we go back here and I just go ahead and climb up, I can press W and it's finding things, but it doesn't matter. But now let's say if I press A and then I press spacebar, it'll do W spacebar. Requires that input in order to actually proceed. It'll still search for an object. And this is just so that way it'll still know where you're trying to go, but it won't allow you to get there until you actually press the necessary input. So this isn't a required element. It's just that if you wanted to have that additional thing to be able to stop climbing actions from happening automatically, you can go ahead and add this in. Easy peasy, no problem. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about the wall running side of things, as well as some other aspects of the climbing system. Just because this video has gone on a little long, and this is kind of the baseline elements. You really just need to be able to, have some sort of, if you want to use the input, set this up. And the differences on motion warping is just setting up the climbing notify versus the reset action notify, and everything else is handled for you. So we're going to go ahead and close out for this video, but in the next one, we are going to talk about wall running, some additional climbing stuff. So I hope you guys are excited. We're going to keep going on with the series. Hope to see you in the next one. But until then, stay animated.